Dane Rose here, and in this video I want to explore the algorithm I'm using to integrate and to steer myself towards well-being. And it's commonly thought that the discretionary areas of our reality is shaped by our choices. Now, in trauma, this has a lot more to do with our environment than our choices, because trauma is one of those phenomena that we tend to be more influenced by our subconscious and unconscious mind in response to deeply ingrained fight, flight, freeze, trauma-learned responses in childhood, how we dealt with our first perceptions of life-threatening danger. And so with that in mind, understanding that while in the full fledges of a full-blown trauma, it's much more instinctual. The question is, what do we do? How do we navigate out of trauma in that window of discretionary influence, in that window of discretionary choice? And so I'll just talk a little bit about my algorithm. So the first thing that I reference is trauma literature. So this is going out and learning about it and then integrating it into choices. So trauma literature. Now, the second thing that I reference, and what this is, when I talk about an algorithm, I'm looking for integrity. I'm looking to integrate as much as possible in these reference points. So the next thing that I reference is my partner's well-being. So we're looking at choices and discretionary choices and discretionary actions in the domain that I influence. I don't influence U.S. immigration policy. I don't influence how much airlines cost. There's all kinds of stuff that I don't influence. I don't influence how health insurance in the United States is done. But what I do influence are referencing these things. So trauma literature, number one, the body keeps score, Bessel van der Kolk. Number two, healing trauma. Peter Levine. Number three, Bradshaw and the family, trauma and shame. Number four, post-romantic stress. Number five, hungry ghosts. Gabor Mate. Number six, PCAL. And Shogun does a lot of referencing to trauma and protocol and ethics and diseases, etc. in the trauma literature. So just a couple of reference points. And what I'm looking for is the common denominator in these different books. What's going on in this book that ties in with this book? And it expands out because we've actually got over 100 different titles. And so, what does Brené Brown add to what Bradshaw says about shame? What does Bradshaw say different from the channel Lazarus, who has done 4 tapes on shame? How does that tie in with what I know about helplessness and rage? So we're looking for integrity. Now, part of the integrity, my partner is a trauma survivor. And one of the biggest vulnerabilities in trauma is re-traumatizing. Now, this goes back to the Greek mythology or myths about Medusa. The woman, the emotional embodiment of the dark goddess, the woman, the symbol of emotion, that one look at her turns people to stone. And the great quest to cut off the head of Medusa and bring the head back on the journey of enlightenment, on the journey to transcendence, to bring back the writhing head of snakes, to bring back that the conquering of trauma as a necessary quest on our process of becoming, which we learn from the myth must be done through a mirror. You cannot deal with it directly. You cannot deal with it directly. When you deal with the trauma directly, you re-traumatize. When you re-traumatize, you turn aspects of the brain, if we look at Bessel van der Kolk's research on a thing like Broca's area of the brain, where you lose senses of time, you become frozen in a moment. If we look at things like what Brené Brown has talked about the trauma of shame, if we look at biology and realize that in our biology, let's look at things like the science of secure attachment, a new book that's talking about the fact that we need a deeply attuned, trustworthy relationship to be at our best biologically, as a tip of the hat to hundreds of millions of years in biological formation as pack animals, as monkeys, as mammals. We survive best in a pack, in a herd, whether that's dogs, etc. We can learn from my dog. My dog's happiest moment is when I return. Why is that built into his biology? Why does he feel so much better when a familiar relationship returns? Is it because he knows what we all know at some level, that his survival is in jeopardy if he's alone, and his survival goes up significantly if he's part of a family of secure, attached relationships? How does he know that? Dogs are smart. They're not fooled by Facebook. They're not fooled that, a computer screen is somehow going to take you to the hospital or give you food or give you a warm cuddle or, be a lover or give you clean air. A computer is not going to do that. It's a regular, trustworthy, familiar presence is going to do that. And our biology has learned that over long stretches of time. And the whim of 1 out of 10,000 cultures, the modern Western culture, which in the last 400 years decides to violate the principles of biology and idealize the Marlboro Man and the epitome of independent isolated individuals who don't need anyone does not change our biology. And so I reference what I learn, and what I see is that nature, which is far more sustainable than human beings, so this is, biology / nature / research / dog. So all of this message is pointing at, and even couples, you can take avoidance attachment style couples that are proud, having experienced early childhood trauma, not to need anyone. They're proud not to need anyone because needing someone, and particularly not having that need met, is equated as weakness and shame in a culture that shames mostly men, but shames men and women for needing and being weak. We've raised a generation of people that despise need and will, in some cases, rather die than experience the social shame that they've internalized of needing someone. Now, this has nothing to do with millions of years of biology. It has nothing to do with science. It has to do with elements of a sociopathic culture in relationship to children, and it has to do with elements of the chauvinistic view on community and need, that an isolated, independent individual is better somehow than a connected, interdependent tribe, family, or community. And there's only one logic in which it's better, and it is a logic based on experience in which the community and the family has betrayed the individual to such an extent that the individual feels safer in a detached isolation than they do in an integrated, trustworthy family. So when you have a sociopathic family or community or culture, independent isolationism is an effective survival strategy, but only in that condition. When you have a family that puts the needs and well-being of the child first, when you have a community that puts the well-being of a child first and integrates that from the perspective of the child, and when you have a culture that does not shame femininity, emotion, need, and community in any way, but just looks at it scientifically, the biology, the science, the cultural history, and nature itself all points towards interconnectedness, mutual value, synergy being one of the most powerful forces around. So I look to that and use it to distance myself from my culture. And the root word of culture is, of course, cult. Cult, an irrational conformity despite the data. That's how we know something is cult-like, when everyone's doing it and it makes no sense. Now, I feel lucky in a certain sense that when I was 10 years old, we moved to England. And as soon as I got to England, I noticed everyone talked differently. And I noticed that they all thought that the way I talked was weird. And because it was weird, it was something to make fun of. And I knew that the way they talked was weird. And I thought it was absurd. I also saw several things that they were doing in England that were absolutely absurd on a scientific level. Like, I noticed the door locks. They had these giant keys. These keys were so cumbersome. They used 3 times as much metal as any key I'd seen in America. They used 3 times as much metal. They were 3 times more uncomfortable in the pocket. They were easier to pick as a lock. And you couldn't have as many, clunking around making noise. And there was not a single redeeming aspect of these keys. And I thought, why are these still being sold in hardware stores? Why isn't a single hardware store in England going over to the United States looking at cheaper, better, more secure, more comfortable keys in every sense of the word for a third the money? Why isn't someone doing that and then bringing that design back and everyone adopting that? And the answer is simple. They've been around for thousands of years. They've been making those keys for hundreds of years, and so they just irrationally continued a pattern that no longer made any sense. But what I also saw was the dual flush toilets. In England, in Europe, they were making toilets where if you pressed one button, it was for urine, and the other button was for feces. And I'd never seen one of these toilets in the United States. And they'd been making them for years. So the United States was just as cult-like, just in a different area. And of course, they've slowly been migrating over. But for well over a decade, people were manufacturing and are still manufacturing toilets that do not have this feature. They're harder to use, harder. The flush is on the side. It's absurd. Now, this is a clue. Reality is holographic. So when you find this anomaly in your first time out of your sphere, meaning this was my first time out of my country, I'm already finding absurdity and sanity. Absurdity in the new place that isn't in my place, and absurdity in my place that isn't in the new place. But everyone's doing it, no one's questioning it, and no one's bothering to learn what's going on in the other place. Now, this is the clue. This tells you you're in a cult. In this case, the cult of bizarre keys and the cult of poorly designed toilets. The cult of referencing one thing only. Is everyone doing it? Not the cult of, is this intelligent? Is it the best practice in the world? Anything like that. So this is kind of the gap. Now, the cult of the United States, when it comes to the ideal feminist woman, is I don't need a man, basically. Which, if you're heterosexual, means I don't need anyone. So, and then the ideal of the Marlboro Man, touted for some time, I don't need anyone. I'm superior. I don't need one of those needy women, right? So this is cult, classic cult. It is a trauma response when needs did not get met in childhood. In a sociopathic country, what's the biggest enemy of the United States? Communism, where the community comes first. So of course, we got to kill them, and we've got to focus on the individual comes first. Fuck the family, fuck the community, fuck the country. I'm an American. I'm all about me, and I don't need anyone. The trouble is this does not work in any of nature's systems. And nature's been around for 5 billion years. The Western culture is destroying 5 billion years of evolution much faster than it's sustaining it. So do you want to bet with the $5 billion or the 5 billion year winner, the one who's won for 5 billion years, or do you want to bet with the person who's been losing ever since they arrived? Meaning every inch of topsoil, every species lost, every species extinguished, every deterioration in water, every raise in temperature, every increase of particulate matter in the air we breathe, every noisy sound, every glaring power line and billboard and stuff, every advertisement, every gun, every one of these pollutants of well-being are spending energy to make our quality of life less than it was when nature was building topsoil, adding a new species, keeping things beautifully quiet. No lawnmowers, no blasting jackhammers, no. Beautiful. it's getting better every year versus it's deteriorating. Oh, we've just spilled, 10 million gallons of oil into this ocean that's going to take 500 years to whoops, saved a little. So when you look at who you're going to bet on, do you want to bet on a winner or do you want to bet on a loser? Well, we just partition off. We're very good at compartmentalized thinking. So we ignore all the areas we're losing so that we can pretend that we're winning. But the science is on the side of nature. Scientists are not saying that our behavior is intelligent. Scientists are saying that we're destroying our environment faster than we're creating it at an unsustainable level. Well, are we doing anything about it? No. Does that make us intelligent or dumb? You decide. Well, I'm betting with nature. So when I see my dog doing something intelligent, and my dog's part of a 100-million-year-old system of what works, and my dog knows that bonded, deep social relationships, celebrating joy, affection, taking care of the pack works. Now, my culture doesn't know that. Well, there's a lot of things we don't know. So I reference that. The research on biology, I look at nature, I spend time in nature. I try and learn from how does nature do it. I'm a landscape designer, etc. And so I pay attention to that. I pay attention to the Greeks, who did a better job healing trauma. They had far more trauma than we did. The Greeks went through a period of fighting 7 wars simultaneously. They had 7 enemies, like on all sides, which meant that every single Greek citizen had people dying that they knew, parents dying, they were fighting in the wars, they were seeing death, they were murdering people, etc. And they had to deal with this, and they created the Greek tragedies and the Greek mythologies in part as a way to project the human psyche outside of them and work with it through mythology, through dreams, and through acting, through a symbolic representation, not dealing with it directly. Meaning they didn't sit their mother down and say, you did this and it hurt me, and da-da-da-da-da. They put all the tragedies that they experienced as a culture into a play, and they all played all the different parts. And in doing so, they connected with the wound metaphorically without re-traumatizing themselves. And they grieved and they wept and they engaged with these metaphors, understanding that they were talking about themselves in the tragedies. It wasn't someone else's tragedy, it was the tragedy of the cult, of the culture. It was the tragedy in the environment of fighting 7 wars simultaneously and the enormous suffering and loss of life. So I reference that. I reference Russian fairy tales, and to some extent fairy tales like Iron John. They tell clues. If you understand that, much like dreams, which I also reference, so if we look at through the lens of dreams, everyone in the dream is you. So you are relating to you in a dream. And so you have to figure out, well, okay, so this part is my vindictive 12-year-old. And this part is my innocent 7-year-old. So my vindictive 12-year-old is, humiliating and beating on my innocent 7-year-old. My innocent 7-year-old is asking for help from my 23-year-old. And my 23-year-old doesn't know what to do because my 23-year-old did not get an emotional education in the United States. So there's a tragedy within the psyche. These 3 are not in sync. And I'm getting that information through the dream. Okay, so if I'm all the characters, so who's not doing their job? The 23-year-old. So how about the 23-year-old help the 12-year-old feel power in some other way? And how about the 23-year-old answer the call of the innocent 7-year-old? And how does the innocent 7-year-old feel now? How does the 12-year-old feel now? How does the 23-year-old feel now? How do I feel as the witness watching the new play? Well, this is a feedback loop from the narrow band of conscious mind, which is aware of less than 1% of reality, and the larger mind, which is the unconscious mind, which comes to us through symbol, through myth, through dream, through intuition, through pictures, through art, through embodiment. Sometimes I go out on my motorcycle. This is all about the dream doorway to unconscious. So the dream doorway to the unconscious comes through many different ways. You can look at your entire life like a dream, in which every person in the dream is you. And you've got the jealous, malevolent part of you trying to trick you. You've got the sociopathic part of you behaving like you, the current conscious you, doesn't exist. You've got the victim that doesn't know how to protect themselves. You've got the lover who feels unmet. You've got the lover that wants to cheat on this other part over here. You've got the one that wants you to cheat but will punish and distrust you if you do. You have the one who's testing you. You have all these different ones, and when you honor and understand that each person in your reality is part of a dream, and that it's your job to understand who you are in the dream, number one, and two, to act accordingly, and to both not take it personally and take it very personally. To say, how do I navigate with this part of myself? Every time I open my mouth, this part of myself gets more upset. So I just avoid them. Okay, so I do the same inside. There's a part of me that could behave that way, and I don't know how to deal with it, so I avoid it and I pretend that that's not me. And so so if we look through this general lens, then something like, for example, I'll drive out on my motorbike. I'll have an idea, that's referencing thoughts. So I represent thoughts and logic. These have always served me well, correlating with science, etc. So I'll reference thoughts and logic, and I'll say, okay, that's a nice idea. For example, I'm on my way to have a massage, but I get to the door of this studio where I do my filming, and my hand lingers on the lock. And I listen to the hand. I listen to my mind that says I've got an agenda to have a massage. But I also listen to my hand, and I say there's something there. Now, do I want to see what's there? Well, this video is what's there. Meaning, if my hand hadn't lingered, and my brain had not said, hello hand, what do you have to bring me in here? This video doesn't occur. Now, this video is not following my hand. This video is following a lineal thought. So, are they on the same page, or did my hand want to come in for something else? I'm not entirely sure, but I listen. When I go out on my motorbike, sometimes I get to the crossroad and I turn left. I turn the opposite. Sometimes I head out this way and I feel like, no, this is not the thread. I thought this. No, it's this, and then it's this. And sometimes I'll bounce through 5 different, trying to get my mental mind to catch up to where my body wants to go that I don't know, because it doesn't fit into a logical algorithm until I get there. For example, the last time that happened a day or so ago, it led me to a new masseuse, and I had a very deep and transcendent healing in which I went into an altered state that particular masseuse could facilitate, and none of the other locations that I thought I was going would facilitate. And so I took it on faith that the part of me that took me there by turning this way and then this way and then this way and then this way and then said, stop here. And I'm like, well, what am I doing here? Okay, let's talk with them. My goodness. This was a fat, pimply-faced young woman who my logic would not have taken me to her. It wouldn't have taken, there was nothing that would have taken me there except my body. Now, my body knew something immediately when I had her hold my hand. I felt an energy that I didn't feel. And I wouldn't have known that I would feel that energy until my body felt it. So I'm listening to the wisdom of the body, which knows more in certain areas than any mental knowledge I've got. Remember, this brain that we normally steer from has less than 1% of all of the information that is to be had, which means it's always going to make an incomplete conclusion. We learn this in science all the time, where the beauty of science is not that they know what they're doing. It's that the scientific method, if they follow it with discipline, tells them over and over and over again, you got it wrong. No, it doesn't look like 3 dimensions fully understands the full space-time curvature throughout the multiverse. We may need 11 dimensions. Well, how does that work? Well, what about this and what about this? No, it doesn't seem like everything does follow the speed of light. No, it doesn't seem like the speed of light is a constant. No, margarine is not the best thing for your health. No, some fats are actually very important for your brain development. If you don't take those fats, you'll get fat and sick. If you eat these fats, all fat isn't wrong. No. So it's a constant process that pretty much every single thing that we believe at any given moment of time becomes more sophisticated or proves to be flat out wrong by the same method that proved it right 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years ago. No, the earth is not flat. No, it doesn't go around the sun doesn't go around the earth. And so this is a method of an inadequate lineal logic, but it's thinking. It's one of the things we use, and it's very good with crude things. I mean, it's absolutely true. If you logically do not put gas in your motorbike, you run out of gas. I mean, there's plenty of things that do stay consistent with this mode of thinking, and then the really important things tend to change. So reference thoughts, reference dream consciousness, the receptivity. Now I look at similar to this, so we've got the body, we've got night dreams, we've got art. When I'm doing my painting, I get a sense of whether I'm on the right track. For example, if I don't know what to paint next, it's like, I don't know what to do next. My hand went this, all this is good. Now what do I do? If it feels stuck, what part of me is stuck? You see? What part of the conscious mind is stuck? And sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, there's this grief here. I had no idea. Oh my goodness. Whew. And as soon as I let the grief start flowing, now we need some blue. But I didn't know we needed blue because I was out of touch with my own feelings. You see, there's a correlation between the poem, between the painting that's going on in the outside and the painting and the poem that's the emotional language in the semi-conscious mind on the inside. And so I can tell how I'm doing if I'll paint. I can say, wow, I'm having a great day today. I've painted 3 paintings in an hour and they all felt perfect. Or I can say, my goodness, this is just drudgery. I feel sad, I feel overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do with the brush next, and then I made it worse here, and I don't know what to do. I have to wait. For what? That leads me to the next thing. New education. About an hour a day, sometimes a lot more, occasionally not at all, but about an hour a day. I listen to what is now a 500 book library on Audible, and I buy new books and new books and new books. They're about $10 each. Now, right now I'm listening to The Science of Secure Attachment. Well, I'm immediately understanding what some of my mistakes are. So one of the key things, if you want to understand that this is you, and this is the reality, which is way bigger than you. So every paradigm focuses on a given slice of reality, number one, and gives you a lens through which to see a given slice. So, for example, the paradigm of attachment gives you the ability to zoom in and study questions like, is my attachment template freezing, avoidant, or anxious? Or is it secure? Is it paralyzed, avoidant, as in the fight, flight, freeze trauma mechanism, or is it a secure? Now, if you're traumatized as an infant, you will typically have a trauma-based attachment protocol. For example, if you are betrayed and abandoned a lot, you will typically feel more safe not needing anyone. So when anyone tries to get close, you feel danger because you're projecting your abuser onto your lover, because your parents said they loved you and abused you, and so there you are. Now, that being the case, the question is, what's the trauma, and how do you get back to a secure attachment model in which you trust trustworthy people, and your synergy factor, your well-being factor, your dimensionality, your ability to love and be loved goes up exponentially, because you're moving from a trauma coping mechanism to a healthy attachment platform based on biology and 200 million years on the planet. Now, this is new education. So of course, I listen, I say, oh, I made this mistake. I go home and apologize. I listen, I say, oh, here's what I need to do that I'm not doing. So I go home and do it. And then I measure results, back to thinking. I look at the results. Oh, my girlfriend loves me more than she did last week. That's a good result. We are closer and more harmonious than we were yesterday. That's a good result. We are fighting more than before. Okay, why is that coming up? Is that because this is bringing us out of alignment? Now, just because something brings you out of alignment does not mean it's bad for you. Let's take one of the situations where many abuse survivors who have gotten rewired will equate abuse with love. So if you come and complain to them, they feel that they matter to you or something like that. And you stop complaining because you realize that doesn't feel very good. Well, now some part of them feels abandoned, like, what's wrong with me? You can complain, what's wrong with me? And so it can take you out of sync to make progress. So that's where the thought and the data comes in to say, I see, this is what happens with abused children. So, okay, don't worry about it, sweetie. You're feeling abandoned because the people who said they loved you normally hurt you, and I'm not hurting you as much. So part of you feels nervous and doesn't know what to do. And so, okay, so that's normal. Look at the data, and let's see if we can switch the love template so that you now feel wonderful that I'm giving you praise and you enjoy it. How about that? Let's practice it and let's work on that. So you have to, of course, connect. This goes back to, how is my partner's well-being? Is it going up or down based? And knowing the science of secure attachment, and that I look at the data also, my creativity is up at least 600%. My creative output is up 6,000% as a result of joining partners with this woman. Now, that is data that correlates in a way that's important to pay attention to, that tells me that my thoughts are out of whack. Because when I met my partner, I had a list, and she met less than 10% of the items on the list, meaning she was a 90% failure to meet my criteria. That just tells me my criteria are wrong. Because when my well-being is up 250% to 500%, and my creativity is up 600%, my creative output is up 6,000%, when my physical health is up around 80%, when my logistical well-being is up more than 100%, and this is all due to someone who met 10% of my criteria, that means my criteria are ill-informed, which brings me back to that awareness that the conscious mind is aware of about 1% of all there is to know, which is why it's not surprising that I came into the relationship on an intuition, which we often tend to be more open to an intuition when the conscious mind is failing on so many levels to survive and make us happy, that we're desperate to try something. So an intuition pops up, okay, I'll do it. Let's see what happens. And this is a tricky situation because, for example, abuse patterns need to get resolved. Trauma needs to get resolved. So one thing that can happen intuitively if you let go of your thoughts and just follow instinct is you can get thrown right into your trauma cycle to deal with it. But you don't know that you need to deal with it. You don't know what trauma is. It just feels bad. And so you punish your partner who kindly showed up and brought your attention to the pattern so it could be looked at. And that is, back to trauma literature, et cetera, a big thing. I also, of course, look at logistics, primarily money. I look at things like, in the next 4 years, is what I'm doing hurting or helping my money? What is my money over the next few months' cash flow? Since I'm doing tons of things that do not make any money and that cost money, I am aware of cash flow. I'm aware of what I would do if money was no object, and I'm aware of how money ties in with security and trauma, and I'm aware of the need to have backup reserves to avoid trauma, and I'm aware of what I need to do to make money. And so all of that is stuff that I'll reference on a daily basis. And I talked about kind of the intuition of the body. I also reference my energy level. Meaning that at the end of some of these videos, I feel exhausted and my head hurts. And I just need to lay down. And that's a data point. At the end of other videos, I feel highly energized, highly excited, and I'm smiling more. That's also a data point. I also have a certain amount of attention and play every year or every day, meaning, if I I look at, is what I'm doing increasing my overall energy level? The other thing that I look at, and specifically, is my own patterns. For example, I have a tightening pattern and a pattern of being critical. Now, for example, if I'm being critical to my partner, and this ties in with my partner's well-being, I've learned that it means that I'm terrified. So I have to pause and say, oh, I'm being very critical. What am I terrified about? Now this ties in with sexuality in need, for example. The more insecure that I feel, the less willing I am to have sex, because sex opens me up to my emotional need of my partner, and the experience of strong emotional need in my partner and not feeling safe that my needs will be met is a terrifying, tightening experience, which then overshadows sexual arousal. So I will look at how terrified I am in part by my willingness to be sexual. And now that I've gotten aware of that, I can start exploring and saying, gee, I'm really scared of losing you right now. Let's talk about that. And the critical rejecting energy can be transformed into owning vulnerability. Like, I'm absolutely scared shitless about this because I've never had a single feminine energy that was stable and solid, beginning with my mother, and I can't deal with another abandonment right now. And I'm controlling my need by controlling pleasure and flow between us. And I'm creating conflict to create a sense of power. I'm doing it, and it's up to me, which gives me a sense of security. So, honey, anytime I'm criticizing you, you're not doing anything wrong. You're a wonderful partner. It just means I'm terrified, And so here's why. And that goes back to the intelligence of forming a relationship with someone with a strong, secure attachment module who puts relationship first. An intelligent, secure person like that comforts, listens, understands, and participates in a deepening of the love, nurtures, reassures. And some of the terror then lifts off, which means that some of the criticism lifts off, which means that some of my defenses lift off, which means I have more energy. I'm not spending energy defending. I'm spending energy enjoying or being saturated with energy. A final source is meditation. And divergence. Overall, that's what I'm looking at all of this. But one of the things is, for example, if I think of meditating and I cringe and turn away, I say, there's a block there. What is it? If I think of meditation and there's a flow and there's a beautiful energy, I say, okay, that bit is open. So I look basically constantly at all of these different areas, as well as what I'm feeling, the emotions, understanding that feelings have a structure around them, meaning that rage sometimes protects helplessness that's inside of rage, and that inside helplessness is desperation, and inside desperation is terror and hurt, and inside that is extreme loneliness. And so I look at what I'm feeling, but I also look at what level of feeling. For example, if I know and feel and I'm conscious of being incredibly safe, I might be feeling the deep loneliness, ache of loneliness, and say, I'm feeling terribly lonely. Can you help with this? If I'm feeling incredibly insecure, I might be in rage. How dare people do this? And da-da-da-da-da. And act the opposite of how I'm feeling to defend the feeling. And so I look at how deep I am in and out of my defenses, the intensity of emotion, are they resolving or dissipating? In all of this, is it coming into balance? Meaning, if the best practices of the best scientists and literature on the planet is all pointing towards a certain situation as being a positive mood, but I'm terrified of it, then I'm more likely to work with the feelings and say, well, what's the history that makes me out of sync where I'm terrified of doing the thing that all the best experts consider healthy? If cash flow and logistics are not working, I look at how to repair those, knowing they're not personal. Though I do find sometimes that when I make a decision that flows and clears things for me, instantly money pours in. I just pay attention. It's a feedback source. Within 10 minutes of making this decision, I've got 2 emails from people wanting to do large jobs of some kind. It's like, okay, good to know. And all of this is in a reference that little me cannot possibly pay attention to more than about 1% of what all the big human psyche is dealing with, all the information that could be known, all of the larger cycles and trends that are unconscious. The author Dewey has done a book on the study of cycles. The fact that every single thing in the universe has a rhythm of some kind. And some are 10,000 year cycles, some are 5,000 year cycles, some are 1 million year cycles, some are 1 day cycles, some are 5-minute cycles. But those cycles all bring things up and down in a certain way. And it's very much like you can be splashing in a bathtub with one cycle, and then your house can be engulfed in a tidal wave, which is that every 10 to 30 years there is a tidal wave. That's the cycle. And that, of course, obliviates the little bath splash. The big cycles override the small cycles. And so the big danger we have when we understand small cycles, this gets into the black swan phenomena that the author has dedicated his life to, the book The Black Swan. The fact that once we become confident that every time we press the bicycle brake, the bicycle stops, and every time we don't press the bicycle brake, the bicycle continues, we become overconfident of the fact that the world is much bigger than a bicycle brake. And so we become overconfident that there is a certainty that reality will continue as it's currently continuing. In that certainty, every time I am very confident, I know exactly what to do with my money, I know exactly what to do with my sex, with my this and that and the other. In that confidence, we have a natural myopia of the small me, which is really the lens of the conscious self that can only turn its attention to one direction. And we find ourselves on these, suddenly engulfed with these giant waves of energy. For example, a 18-wheeler comes up behind us, doesn't see us, and we put on our bicycle brakes, and the 18-wheeler with more than 70 tons of cargo jams us forward, and we realize that there's a bigger cycle, that in our demographic there is 1 in every million bicyclists gets hit by an 18-wheeler, and we're one of those 1 in a million, and so we're hit. Or a hurricane comes up and blows us, our whole body, forward, even while the bicycle falls to the ground, and we are propelled forward. Or we break a leg and we can't drive the bicycle anymore. We didn't have a backup plan because we were so confident in the bicycle. This is, these very, very large cycles are something that we can't control, so we put out of mind, so we become overconfident, and in general, we can count on black swan events happening in every area of our life enough of a time that we have to have resiliency, invest in resiliency, and also look up from time to time. You know, when a giant tree is falling down on us, the fact that we always walk at 2 miles per hour on our calculated jog, etc., has to change if we want to stay alive. So, so this is the algorithm. And what I want to say is that the more seamless and fluid and integrated and intuitive and organic this is, the better. So, for example, if I'm making a video a day, driving out on the motorbike, interacting with my partner, having dreams, talking about dreams, looking at reality, looking at my feelings, looking at my level of feelings, looking at my cash flow, looking at my energy level, looking if I want to meditate and if not why, etc. Reading something new in education, looking at the kind of painting that I do, looking at nature and biology, being mindful of fairy tales. The Russian fairy tales, along with the Greek fairy tales, tend to be older. Basically, the older the story, the more it tends to be a language of the psyche, and the less something designed to just please a 5-year-old. You know, the train went up the hill and down the hill and had a name Thomas. You know, there's no great mythological message in that story, but a story about Baba Yaga or Iron John or Vasilisa the Beautiful or Ivan the Fool. These have many, many layers of dreamlike meanings that can talk and give us clues about how to relate to some of the different parts in our psyche. So all of this is my algorithm, what I've arrived at, finding myself in a life-threatening trauma, financially, emotionally, physically, and mentally, in which it was not clear that I would not go insane. It was not clear that I would survive economically. It was not clear that I would survive socially. It was not clear that I would survive physically. And feeling, you know, just swept up in some of these larger energy flows. The question is how to navigate that kind of terrain that is new, meaning you can't just do what you did before because your body's flat in your back, or you know, money's pouring out at $10,000 a week and there's a limit, and so you know some changes have to be made, and they have to be made fast in an uncertain environment. This, getting to know all of this, you know, for example, after I've done 100 tries of driving left when the motorbike and my body starts steering it left when I thought I was going to the right, and seeing what happens, I say, well, I always learn something, and I've had some great surprises that are phenomenal. So unless I'm on a deadline that's time sensitive, when the motorbike wants to turn left when I thought I was going to go right, I go left. And then when I thought, okay, now I thought we're going to here because we turn left and normally I go there when I go left, now it's going to the right or to the left again. Now it's taking me into a new place. What happens? You know, I just monitor the data. Now, this is a testing, you know, it's a tested algorithm basically, and it's a very good one. There's just one small problem. Doing this well does not fit into modern life. It fits into tribal life. I mean, this is what someone in an Amazonian tribe might do naturally and have done all their life, other than the reading books and stuff, you know, trauma literature, and they probably wouldn't have been traumatized in the same way, you know. But in our culture, this takes time. And fortunately, in the anticipation of wanting more and more freedom, I've spent the last 25 years navigating my business to a point where it's very profitable working 2 hours a day, 6 months out of the year. And so that choice to do more than 1,000 things over a 25-year period to move me in that direction of more and more latitude, including the Audible readings and stuff, that's $5,000 invested 2 to 3 hours a day for a period of some years, translated into well over $100,000 of profit for the 5,000 invested in learning the information and 500 books and applying it logistically and applying it, in ways that is as consistent as possible. So what I'm looking is for integration of all of these things. And it feels absolutely wonderful when I'm able to find something that follows the dream, follows the intuition, the body wants to go there, the feelings lighten, the thought thinks it's a good idea, it corresponds with what I read in a recent book, best practices are consistent or say nothing about it, energy level is up, reminds me of a myth. This is a great, safe journey, as opposed to going into the dark wood of terror and fear, where it feels terrible, I have no idea where I'm going, I have no idea what my boundaries are, I don't know what the costs are, if I have enough money, I'm just completely clueless, and I don't want to look at this, and I don't want to look at this because I'm scared of it, and I'm ashamed of this and that and the other, and so I'm just lost in the dark wood. This is the journey out of the dark wood into the transcendent forest, in which reality is our friend and supporting us in the best possible journey to ride the cycles that are not personal. The tsunami every 10 to 30 years is not personal. How and where you build your house is. The statistic of motorcycle accidents around here is not personal. Whether you wear a motorcycle helmet is, and how much risk you take, etc., etc. So thanks for joining me, and I hope this helps you navigate the terrain of your psyche, your soul, and perhaps leads you out of a trauma into a transcendent forest.